Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this, because today we're unpacking a challenge that absolutely blew my mind. We're talking about the sheer, massive scale of today's global energy transition. We are literally rewiring how we generate, store, and deliver power across the globe. But as we're going to see, just throwing money at the problem is really only half the battle. The physical infrastructure of our world is being pushed to its absolute limits, and it's forcing us to get incredibly creative with how we actually power our future. To really understand the scale of what's happening right now, you just have to look at this number, $386 billion. That is the record-breaking global investment in new renewable energy projects for just the first half of 2025. To put that into perspective, that's roughly equivalent to funding the entire Apollo space program multiple times over in just 6 months. It represents a 10% increase year over year. So capital is absolutely flooding into the market and completely rewriting the economics of global energy. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where all that money is flowing. This massive macro-level boom is really being driven by giant buildouts in offshore wind, alongside an ongoing wave of small-scale solar. I mean, the European Union alone saw a 63% growth jump from the previous half. So the money and the momentum, they are absolutely there. Here is our roadmap for the Explainer today. We'll start with the global power surge, move into breaking the grid bottleneck, then look at solar-powered shared mobility, massive mobile fast charging, charging as a service, and finally, fueling the clean grid.
All right, part 1, the global power surge, AI and the energy boom.
So for the first time in basically 2 decades, the United States is seeing a major inflection in power demand. The exponential build-out of AI data centers, combined with the incredibly rapid electrification of our transportation systems, is demanding just massive amounts of generation capacity. But, here's the catch. While the investments are certainly there, the sheer speed of AI and electric vehicle deployment is heavily stressing our aging grids. We're displacing reliable baseload capacity with intermittent renewables, and it's creating these incredibly long interconnection queues. Because think about it, you can't just plug a massive data center or a commercial EV charging hub into a 50-year-old grid overnight without risking the reliability of the power going to our own homes.
Which brings us to part 2, breaking the grid bottleneck, the cost of waiting.
If you're a business out there right now trying to install a legacy, grid-tied DC fast charging station, you are looking at a world of pain. The engineering, the procurement, permitting, and installation, that whole process can easily take 18 months or longer. As an example, when Ford told its dealerships they needed to install 2 DC fast chargers just to sell EVs, the estimated cost came in at a staggering $900,000 per dealership. No way, right? But here's the crazy part. Contrast that with the new generation of agile off-grid solutions. We're talking about installations that take 48 hours or less, cost a fraction of the price, often under $100,000, and require absolutely zero grid upgrades. So, the old way is totally bottlenecked, the new way is 100% grid-free.
Let's dive into some of those solutions in part 3. Solar-powered shared mobility, Beam Global.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer elegance of the hardware itself. This is Beam Global's EV Arc, and it completely bypasses that awful grid bottleneck we just talked about. It requires no construction, no trenching, no electrical work whatsoever. It literally drops into a standard parking space in a matter of minutes, and because the cars just park right on its base pad, a business or city doesn't lose a single parking spot. It's essentially a localized microstation generating its own power right on site. And let's run through these specs because they are incredible. Since these units actually track the sun and store energy in onboard batteries, which range from 20 to 40 kilowatt hours, they can generate up to 265 e-miles of driving range every single day. That's practically like driving from New York to Washington, D.C., powered entirely by today's sunlight. That means zero utility bills, ever. Plus, they are flood-proof up to 9.5 feet, can withstand 160 mile-per-hour winds, and they're fully ADA compliant. In fact, right now, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council in Massachusetts is using these exact charges for a Zipcar pilot program in Greater Boston. They've dropped these into places like the Chelsea and Boston housing authorities to bring affordable, zero-utility cost EV car sharing directly to underserved communities that traditionally just didn't have access.
Now you might be wondering, is a solar canopy actually enough to keep a shared car charged up? Well, this stat blew me away. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, household vehicles are parked about 95% of the time. Plus, the median trip for Zipcar's Boston EV fleet is only 25.5 miles. So these cars are basically sitting parked for long stretches between relatively short trips, which gives these off-grid solar chargers plenty of time to bank sunlight and keep the batteries topped up without ever touching the local grid. Moving right along to part 4. Massive mobile fast charging. SparkCharge.
SparkCharge has completely supersized their mobile charging technology with the Roadie V3. Let's just marvel at these specs for a second. The original Roadie V2 used these 3.5 kilowatt-hour stackable blocks that weighed about 200 pounds, which was perfect for, say, a tow truck giving a stranded EV a quick emergency boost. But the Roadie V3? It is a whole different beast. It packs a staggering 75 kilowatt-hour battery. That is enough energy to power an average home for days and weighs in at 1,600 pounds. It pushes out energy at an impressive 90 kilowatts, which can actually be upgraded to 125 kilowatts, meaning it can completely discharge its stored energy into a vehicle in about 45 minutes.
SparkCharge uses these massive batteries as the foundation for the Roadie V3 Hybrid. This is a semi-permanent, off-grid DC fast charging station. It takes that stored DC energy and cranks it straight into a vehicle, delivering up to 250 miles of range per single charge. Think about what this actually means for commercial fleets like FedEx, USPS, or UPS. If they want to test out an EV pilot program, they don't have to wait a year and a half and drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on permanent grid-tied infrastructure at a depot they aren't even sure is the best location. No, they can have this hybrid station dropped off and running in 48 hours. This is exactly how the massive logistics companies that deliver all our online shopping are figuring out how to go green without going bankrupt.
Which leads us to part 5, charging as a service, end-to-end power.
Let's move to CHaaS and see how this builds into a completely frictionless experience. Think of it kind of like a cell phone data plan, but for commercial fleet energy. With charging as a service, the customer pays zero upfront capital costs. SparkCharge deploys the hardware, the chargers, connectors, their mobile power hubs, in as little as 7 days. The customer literally just pays for the energy they use, almost like a traditional utility bill, but without the horrible utility waiting line. An intelligent system called Spark AI monitors and optimizes every single charging session, and SparkCharge handles all the 24/7 operations, maintenance, and servicing. The fleet manager never has to worry about the infrastructure at all. They just plug in and pay per kilowatt hour.
And finally, part 6, fueling the clean grid, the macro view.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that these off-grid and hybrid solutions aren't just clever workarounds. They actually protect our legacy grid. When a system like the Roadie V3 Hybrid is connected to the grid, it pulls a steady, low-impact charge over time, storing energy locally. Then, when a vehicle plugs in for a fast charge, the battery discharges the power, absorbing that massive demand spike. As you can see right here, this essentially smooths out the consumption curve for utilities and can entirely eliminate the need to go out, dig up the street, and upgrade transformers. It buys us vital time while the massive baseload projects of the future are being built. And speaking of those massive baseload projects, we are currently witnessing a completely unexpected nuclear resurgence to meet these staggering demands of AI and electrification. The U.S. government recently struck an agreement with Westinghouse for at least $80 billion in new reactors. But even more surprisingly, tech giants are directly funding nuclear power themselves. Google and NextEra Energy are actually restarting the Duane Arnold nuclear plant in Iowa under a multi-decade agreement specifically to power Google's expanding data centers. Because of huge investments like this, Wood Mackenzie expects U.S. nuclear output to climb roughly 27% after 2035, helping secure the reliable, carbon-free baseload power we absolutely have to have moving forward. Which leaves us with this final, fascinating question to ponder. As we race to electrify our world and power the age of AI, what is our infrastructure actually going to look like? Will our future grid be defined by these massive, centralized nuclear power plants, or will it be a decentralized web of millions of agile, off-grid, solar and battery-powered microstations quietly operating in our parking lots and depots? Well, the truth, as we've seen today, is that we are urgently going to need both. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your eyes on the grid. It is changing faster than ever.